The first sign that something was off came when I stepped out onto my front lawn in my usual red and black checkered flannel shirt, coffee in hand, ready to enjoy what was supposed to be a calm, quiet morning, only to see three bright yellow stakes hammered into the grass around my old stone water fountain, each stake holding a laminated HOA notice that fluttered wildly in the breeze under the bright morning sun, and before I even walked close enough to read the fine print. I could already feel irritation tightening in my chest because the fountain wasn't just decoration. It was the only thing on my property older than the house itself, a piece of carved limestone that I'd inherited when I bought the land, something the previous owner told me had been here since the late 1800s when this area was still a rural trail route with horse troughs. But none of that mattered to the Homeowner Association because as I approached, I realized they had plastered the fountain with neon orange stickers saying SEIZED property. HOA hold as if they were some government agency with the power to claim history itself. I ran my hand along the cool stone curve of the fountain bowl, tracing the old chisel marks still visible along the edge, and I felt a slow burning anger rising because this wasn't some lawn ornament from a hardware store. This was a documented historic piece, something the county preservation office had actually told me to leave untouched because it was part of an original travel waypoint. I was still rubbing one of the carved grooves when I heard the loud, thudding footsteps I'd come to associate with chaos. And sure enough, Mark, the HOA president, marched toward me with two clipboard-carrying volunteers trailing behind him like nervous ducklings. And before I even opened my mouth, he pointed a shaking finger at me and shouted, "You are in violation of multiple property display code sections." His voice boomed across the street, startling a jogger and making Mike, my neighbor, stick his head out of his garage to see what new nonsense the HOA was cooking up. I stared at Mark and then at the fountain, then back at him. "You seize my fountain?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "That fountain has been here for over a century. Illegal, unregistered structure," he barked. "A massive eyesore and a safety hazard. It's literally a chunk of stone," I said. "It's not even functional." "Exactly," he snapped, waving his clipboard. "Non-functional elements are forbidden." "That's not a rule," I said. "Oh, it is now," he said, flipping to a page covered in fresh ink. "I updated the bylaws last night." Mike walked over from his driveway. "Oh great," he muttered. "More 3 a.m. rulemaking." Mark whipped around. "This does not concern YOU, Michael." "Everything concerns me when you're shouting it loud enough for the county to hear," Mike said, taking another sip of coffee. I ignored them and returned to the fountain. "You can't seize it," I said. "This thing is older than the neighborhood, probably older than the entire HOA." Mark puffed out his chest. "Age does not exempt an object from community aesthetic standards." "You don't know what this is," I said. "This is a historical travel fountain." "It is a rock with a hole in it," Mark barked. "And it is now property of the HOA for immediate removal." "Removal," Mike repeated. "With what, a forklift?" Mark checked his clipboard. "A contractor has been hired." "Who?" I asked. "A professional," Mark said proudly. "His name is he squinted at his clipboard. "Todd," Mike snorted. "Todd, the guy who installs Christmas lights for a living," Mark snapped. "He is a certified structural enhancement consultant." "He's a ladder climber," Mike corrected. "A passionate one," Mark said, "and he will be here today to remove this unsanctioned monolith." I felt my jaw clench. "Touching this fountain is illegal," I said. "It's a historically documented roadside marker." Mark scoffed. "Show me the documentation." "Fine," I said, "I will." But before I could pull up the scanned historical records on my phone, Mark held up a hand. "No, we do not recognize documents provided by individual homeowners." Mike blinked. "You don't recognize evidence." "The HOA recognizes HOA evidence," Mark said proudly, tapping his clipboard. "And why records say this is an unapproved feature?" I rubbed my temples. "You just made that rule up." "To protect the community," he shouted. "From what?" I asked. "A carved stone bowl," Mark jabbed a finger at it. "That stone bowl attracts attention. Attention disrupts order. Order protects property values." Greg from across the street shouted. "Mark, nobody even looks at his fountain." Mark whirled on him. "That is because IT blends poorly with the landscape." I glared at Mark. "You didn't even know what it was until 10 minutes ago." "I know what breaks the rules," Mark said, "and this breaks every standard we hold dear." "You hold dear," Mike corrected. Mark stamped his foot. "The HOA stands united," the volunteer behind him whispered. "We don't actually agree on." "Silence," Mark bellowed. "Your president is speaking." I stepped closer to the fountain and folded my arms. "Nobody is touching this fountain," Mark smirked. OH. "And what will you do when TODD arrives with a crane?" "A crane," Mike repeated. "For a 600-pound stone fountain?" "It could be 800, Mark said. "It is a hazard of unknown mass." "You're unbelievable," I said. "Thank you," Mark replied, misunderstanding entirely. "I work hard for this community." Greg shouted again. "By seizing rocks," Mark snapped. "By preserving order." Then with dramatic flair he smacked the fountain's surface with his clipboard like a judge sentencing it to death. This ancient-looking object will be gone by noon." I stared at him. "This ancient-looking object is registered with the county." "No," Mark said, drawing out the word. "It is registered with no one." "It literally has a plaque on the base," I said. Mark immediately leaned down, saw the tarnished metal plate, squinted, and then said, "This is obviously counterfeit." Mike nearly dropped his coffee. A counterfeit plaque on a rock. Yes, Mark yelled. To mislead the HOA, I laughed out loud. I couldn't help it. You think someone forged a historical marker to mess with you? People have done worse, Mark said, and I will not be fooled. But the truth was simple, he wasn't ready, because removing this fountain meant picking a fight with county history, state law, and a preservation office that did not take kindly to amateurs, and the real storm for Mark hadn't even started yet. If Mark's morning tantrum had been ridiculous, then the next phase of his operation was downright theatrical, because after declaring that my century-old fountain was an illicit stone hazard, he marched back down the sidewalk in full dictator strut mode, barking at his volunteers to secure the perimeter, which apparently meant placing more neon stakes and sticking 3 additional HOA warning tags on the grass as if he were tagging evidence at a crime scene. And while he was distracted staging his power fantasy, I pulled out my phone to call the county preservation office, hoping someone could confirm for the 10th time that yes, the fountain was officially cataloged and protected. As the line rang, Mike leaned close and whispered, "If he brings Todd over here with a crane, I'm calling the news. I want this documented." I smirked but didn't respond because someone answered, "County Historical Preservation, this is Daniels." My relief was immediate. "Daniels, it's Hayes. We spoke last year about the limestone travel fountain on my property." "Ah, yes," he replied in a warm, professional voice. "That's a rare piece for this area, still intact, I hope." "More or less," I said, "but my HOA thinks they can confiscate it." Silence. "Then they want to what?" "Remove it," I explained. "They slapped seizure tags on it and hired a contractor." Daniels exhaled sharply. "Send me photos immediately." I snapped pictures from multiple angles, fountain, stakes, seizure notices, even a close-up of Mark pacing with his clipboard like a mall cop policing a food court. I sent everything. Daniels didn't take long to reply. "You need to stall them," he said. "We're coming." "Coming?" I asked. "As in here?" "Yes," he said. "That fountain predates your neighborhood by over a century. It is protected. If anyone attempts to alter it, destroy it, or remove it without authorization, they violate state preservation law." Behind me, Mark shouted, "Put another stake there. The more official IT looks, the better." Daniels sighed. "We'll be there within the hour." I hung up and turned to Mike. "Help is coming." "County help?" Mike asked. I nodded. "The kind that can end an HOA meeting before it starts." That's when Todd arrived. His old white pickup turned the corner, ladders strapped sloppily to the roof, a magnetic decal on the door that read Todd's Home Enhancements, we improve your life. The backseat was overflowing with tangled extension cords, 3 mismatched buckets, and what looked like a leaf blower that had melted in a house fire. Todd stepped out wearing cargo shorts, a tank top, and sunglasses he'd probably bought at a gas station. When he saw the fountain, he whistled. "Wow, that's heavy." Mark puffed out his chest. "Todd, as you can see, we have an unsanctioned object requiring immediate removal." Todd tilted his head. "You want me to take that?" "Yes," Mark barked. "Seize it." "With what?" Todd asked. "My arms." "You said you had equipment," Mark roared. "Cranes, harnesses, tools." Todd scratched his beard. "Equipment?" He thought for a moment. "I mean, I have a dolly in the truck." Greg burst out laughing from across the street. Even Mike snorted. "A dolly," Mike repeated. "A 600-pound historical fountain." Todd shrugged. "It's a good dolly." Mark waved frantically. "Just start getting it ready." Todd bent down and inspected the fountain. Is that a plaque?" "Counterfeit," Mark yelled before Todd could even read it. "Completely fake, do not be deceived." Todd squinted. "Looks real to me." Mark stomped his foot. "You are not paid to think, Todd. You are paid to remove." Todd shrugged again. "I'm actually not paid yet." "You will be," Mark snapped. "After you do your job." I stepped closer. "Todd, before you touch anything, you should know the fountain is protected by the county." Todd froze. "Protected, like legally?" "Yes," I said. "They're on their way." Todd stood up straight. "Well, that changes things. I don't mess with legal." Mark shook violently. "No, you do not listen to HIM. You listen to me. I am the HOA president." Todd raised a hand. "Look, man, I got fined last year for trimming a tree without a permit. I'm not getting wrapped up in another thing." "This is different," Mark shouted. "The HOA has full authority." "Over fountains?" Todd asked. "Yes." "Over historical structures?" I asked. "Yes." "Over state law?" Mike asked. "Yes," Mark screamed, then immediately regretted it as every neighbor in earshot burst into laughter. "No, they don't," I said calmly. "And the county preservation office is sending someone right now." Todd put his hands up. "Okay, I'm out. I'm not touching that rock." "It is not a rock," Mark yelled. "It is a menace." "Looks like a fountain," Todd said. "It is whatever the HOA says it is," Mark shrieked. Todd backed away slowly. "Man, you need a vacation," Mark pointed at him furiously. "And you are fired," Todd shrugged. "You never hired me." "Fired anyway." Todd climbed into his truck and drove away, ladder straps flapping in the wind. Mark spun on me, face twisted in fury. "You think you've won, you have not won. I will remove this fountain if I have to do it myself." He marched toward the fountain like he planned to lift it bare-handed. Mike whispered, "This is going to be good." Mark leaned down, grabbed the stone edge with both hands and pulled. Nothing happened. He pulled harder, still nothing. He planted his feet, grunted, and yanked with the desperation of a man trying to uproot a tree using only rage. The fountain didn't budge, not even an inch. "RRRRGH, come out," he screamed. Volunteers looked away embarrassed. Greg yelled, "Need help, Mark." No, Mark bellowed. I will remove it alone to prove a point. He yanked again hard and immediately lost his balance, falling backward into the grass with a thud that echoed across the yard. Mike nearly spit out his coffee laughing. I walked over as Mark scrambled up, grass stuck to his pants. You're done, I said. This fountain isn't going anywhere, not by you, not by Todd, not by anyone. Mark glared at me, chest heaving. We will see about that, he growled. When the HOA seizes something, it stays SEIZED. Not when the county gets involved, I said. Mark blinked. There is no county involvement. There will be, I replied, in about 30 minutes. Mark's eyes widened just enough to show fear cracking through his rage. Why you did, I nodded. I called them, Mike smirked, and they're bringing paperwork. Mark's knees wobbled. Paperwork? Yep, I said, the kind that overrides clipboards. Mark stared at the fountain, at the stakes, at me, at the road where Todd had fled. The wind picked up, fluttering the HOA seizure notices like the flags of a collapsing kingdom, and that's when he realized he hadn't seized a fountain, he'd declared war on history. If Mark thought Todd backing out was the worst thing that could happen that morning, he clearly underestimated how fast consequences can travel down a road in full sunlight. Because not even 15 minutes after Todd's retreat, the neighborhood grew unusually quiet. Quiet in that strange, anticipatory way that happens before something important arrives. And sure enough, a white county vehicle turned the corner, its logo glinting brightly on the door under the midday sun. The tires rolled onto the curb with the kind of precision only government officials seem capable of, and when the engine shut off, the entire street paused, watching as Daniels, the same preservation officer I'd spoken to earlier, stepped out in a neatly pressed khaki uniform, clipboard in hand, reflective badge catching the sunlight like a warning flare. Mark's reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. Back stiffened, his eyes widened, and he clutched his clipboard so tight it looked like he might snap it in half. No, 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 he stammered, marching forward with frantic steps. You are not ALLOWED here. The HOA did not request any assistance. Daniels glanced up calmly. I wasn't requested, I was informed of a violation. The word violation nearly made Mark unravel completely. There is no violation, we are in the middle of an official HOA operation. Really? Daniels asked. Then why is a historical landmark tagged with seizure notices? He walked toward the fountain, inspecting it the way a jeweler examines a gemstone, precise, slow, focused. Mark scurried after him. That is not a landmark, that is a problem, an unregistered decorative hazard. This, Daniels said, running his hand along the carved rim, is a Category 3 travel fountain, limestone, mid to late 1800s, historically protected. Mark's face twitched. No. It is counterfeit. Daniels raised an eyebrow. Counterfeit? These chisel patterns are original. The mineral wear is consistent with age. The erosion lines match water flow from the old trough system. Mike leaned over to Greg. He just described that fountain more lovingly than Mark describes his clipboard. Greg nodded. It's beautiful to watch. Daniels continued his inspection. This fountain is part of the original rural travel route before urban development. Removing it is illegal without a county permit and a preservation specialist on site. But the HOA has its own rules, Mark protested. HOA rules do not override state law, Daniels said, not even slightly. Mark's voice cracked. But BUTIT is an eyesore. It is a historical asset, Daniels corrected, and a rare one at that. It is unauthorized, Mark screamed. You can't authorize what predates your organization by 100 years, Daniels replied. Mark sputtered like a misfiring lawnmower. But we seized it. You attempted to, Daniels said, illegally. He peeled one of the seizure stickers off the stone. Defacement of a historical object is a serious offense. Mark gasped like someone had stabbed him. Defacement? We did not deface anything. You covered county-protected stone with adhesive, Daniels said. We classify that as defacement. Mark dropped his clipboard. It hit the ground with a soft thud. This cannot be happening. Daniels opened his folder, revealing official documents stamped in bold ink. I am here to conduct a field assessment and document all HOA interference. Interference? Mark squealed. We do not interfere with history. History interferes with US. Mike spit his coffee, laughing. Greg wheezed. Daniels ignored Mark and continued taking photos from multiple angles, writing notes as he circled the fountain. Mark, desperate now, followed him in tight circles like a panicked duck. You cannot write things down. If it is not on an HOA form, it does not count. Daniels didn't even look up. Everything I document counts. No, Mark shouted. Only HOA documentation is valid within the HOA zone. Where exactly, Daniels asked calmly, did you get permission to create an HOA zone? Mark paused. His face went blank. What? Did you file with the city to create a managed HOA overlay? Daniels asked. No, we do not need to file anything. We are the HOA. Daniels jotted something onto his form. Not filing is another violation. Mark staggered backward, pale as chalk. What violation? Operating in a regulatory capacity without city recognition, Daniels said. Unauthorized enforcement actions, illegal seizure attempts. Mark clutched his head. Illegal. We are never illegal, Daniels shrugged. You are today. As neighbors drifted out of their homes to watch, Daniels stepped aside and examined the ground around the fountain. You also staked the soil without soil authority approval. Soil authority? Mark howled. That's not real. It is, Daniels replied, and they're stricter than we are, Mike leaned over. I love when government agencies fight back, Greg nodded. It's like watching nature heal. Mark threw his hands in the air. You cannot cite an HOA for doing its job. You are not doing your job, Daniels said. You're violating preservation law. No, I am protecting property values. This fountain increases property value, Daniels said, considerably. Mark blinked. It what? Landmarks attract interest, Daniels said. Historic pieces raise appraisal scores. Mark swayed, but it is ugly. Beauty is irrelevant to historical classification. Daniels took another photo. But your actions are very relevant to my report. Mark grabbed his clipboard off the ground and held it like a shield. I will not allow this county takeover. This is HOA territory. Everything in this neighborhood falls under county jurisdiction, Daniels said. You have decorative authority, not legal authority. But we are the HOA, Mark screamed. We are the county, Daniels replied calmly. Guess which one wins? The crowd erupted with murmured approval. Mark, on the brink of collapse, turned to me. You did this, you betrayed the HOA. I called the county, I said, because you overstepped. I never overstep, Mark shrieked. Daniels glanced at him. According to your paperwork, you overstep daily. No, Mark stomped. I enforce order. You created chaos, Daniels corrected, and now you're being evaluated for it. Mark's clipboard slipped from his hand again, and this time he didn't bother picking it up. Daniels folded his documentation. We're not done. The county director is on his way. Mark's jaw dropped. The director? Yes, Daniels said. He wants to see the object personally. WHY? Because your attempt to remove a protected landmark flagged our system, and because your HOA has no record of authority to regulate historical items. Mark's knees buckled. No, this is my HOA, my power, my authority. I stepped beside the fountain. Mark, you should sit down. But he stayed frozen, staring at the fountain like it had betrayed him personally. The wind shifted again, rustling the grass. The bright sun lit everything. Daniel's clipboard, the fountain's carved rim, the horrified look on Mark's face. As the truth settled over him like a falling curtain, he wasn't seizing a fountain. He was being dismantled by history itself. If anyone on our street thought the situation couldn't escalate any further than a county preservation officer arriving to dismantle Mark's fantasy of authority, they were proven hilariously wrong the moment a black SUV with government plates rolled slowly around the corner, the sunlight flashing off its windshield like a spotlight announcing the final act of a play. And every neighbor instinctively straightened, as if they sensed that someone far above HOA pay grade had just entered the scene. Daniels, the preservation officer, stepped away from the fountain and nodded respectfully toward the SUV. That's Director Campbell, he said. He oversees all historical preservation cases for 3 counties. Mark's knees nearly buckled at the words. Three counties, he shrieked, spinning toward his volunteers as if he needed witnesses to his panic. Why would a director come here? This is just a rock. A historically registered fountain, Daniels corrected calmly. And you filed a seizure attempt on it. Mark grabbed his clipboard like a life preserver. I did not file anything, I merely tagged an unsightly object. With official-looking seizure labels, Daniels said. Labels intended to mimic government authority. Mark froze mid-breath, mouth open like he'd been slapped. TTHY were not mimicking anything, they were THEY were printed from an HOA website, Mike suggested loudly. Greg snorted. The SUV door opened, and out stepped Director Campbell. A tall, stern-looking man in a crisp gray shirt, pressed slacks, and dark sunglasses, walking with the calm authority of someone who had dealt with far more complex disasters than a frantic HOA president and a stone fountain. The air seemed to still around him. Even the wind quieted. Mark immediately hurried forward, flailing his arms. SIR, you have been misinformed. We are perfectly capable of handling this without county interference. Campbell ignored him and walked straight to Daniels. This the fountain? He asked. Yes, Director, Daniels replied, handing him a folder. Original limestone, late 1800s, documented on the Rural Trail Registry. Homeowner Association attempted unauthorized removal. Campbell ran his hand along the fountain's surface with the care of a museum curator. Remarkable condition for its age, he said. I haven't seen one of these preserved this well in years. Mark sputtered behind him. It is not remarkable, it is an abomination. Campbell turned slowly. And you are? I am the HOA president, Mark declared proudly, chest heaving. Campbell took off his sunglasses and stared at him with the kind of expression that instantly told the entire street he'd already made a mental note. This one is a problem. You ordered this removed? Campbell asked. Yes, Mark shouted. Because it was not approved by the HOA, Campbell raised an eyebrow. You attempted to remove a registered historic artifact because you didn't approve of it. Yes, Mark shouted again, nodding vigorously. Because ITCLASHES with OUR community aesthetic. Campbell blinked once, twice, very slowly. Then he spoke with a calmness so devastating it made Mark physically recoil. Historic artifacts are not subject to aesthetic opinions. Daniels added, or HOA jurisdiction. Campbell nodded, or HOA tantrums. Mike nearly dropped his mug laughing. Greg muttered, write that on a plaque. Mark threw his hands in the air. This is an outrage. I am being attacked for doing my duty. Your duty, Campbell said, is mowing grass, approving paint colors, and making sure trash cans aren't left out too long, not rewriting state preservation law, Mark gasped. You cannot speak to me like that. I just did, Campbell replied. Mark opened his mouth again, but Campbell held up a hand. No, stop, before you say something that ends up quoted in my report. Mark snapped his jaw shut so hard I heard it. Turning to me, Campbell asked, You contacted us? Yes, sir, I said, after the HOA attempted to seize the fountain. Campbell nodded. Good, that was the right call. Most homeowners don't know their rights with protected objects. Mark screeched, He has no rights when it comes to community aesthetics. Campbell turned to him sharply. He has rights when it comes to state law. Mark took a step back. But the HOA is not above the county, Campbell said, and certainly not above history. Daniels slid another paper out of his folder. Director, may I show you something? Campbell looked. What's this? Mark used these seizure tags, Daniels said. Notice the font, the placement, the bold wording intentionally resembling municipal enforcement. Campbell lifted one of the tags between two fingers like it was a biohazard. This is illegal, Mark squeaked. Illegal, imitating government authority, Campbell said, a serious offense. Mark staggered backward, looking as if the earth had tilted beneath him. I didn't know. Ignorance, Campbell said, does not make it legal. The neighbors murmured approvingly. Mark clutched his clipboard tighter. The HOA board will defend me, Campbell shook his head. They aren't responsible. These tags list you as the issuing officer. Mark's clipboard slipped from his shaking hands again and hit the ground with a dull smack, and he stared at it like it had betrayed him. But Campbell wasn't done. Additionally, the director said, your attempt to physically remove a protected object triggers automatic review at the state level. Mark's knees wobbled. Hard. At state level, correct, Campbell said. You're likely looking at fines, mandatory training, and possible suspension from HOA authority. SUSPEN suspension, Mark squealed. Of me. Of you, Campbell confirmed. HOA overreach into historical matters is taken extremely seriously. Mark's face went blank, then pale, then vaguely green. But I am the HOA, I am essential. You're replaceable, Campbell said flatly. Greg whispered loudly, we've been saying that for years. Daniels added, the board will be required to review your position. Mark whimpered. And no, they won't, they would, but even he didn't believe it. As he stared at the fountain, no longer a rock he thought he could dominate, but a symbol of everything he'd just lost, the director signed a form on his clipboard. The fountain, Campbell declared, is officially reaffirmed as a protected landmark. Any further interference will result in legal action. I nodded in relief. Thank you, sir. Campbell handed me a certified document. Keep this on file. If the HOA so much as breathes on this fountain again, you contact me directly. Mark let out a strangled noise. Why you can't give HIM authority, I'm the one who makes decisions. Campbell looked at him with finality. Not anymore. Mark shook his head wildly. No, I won't allow this. It's not your choice, Campbell said. And that was the moment, right then under the bright afternoon sun, when Mark finally realized he wasn't fighting me. He was fighting the entire weight of history, law, and government stacked against him. And he'd already lost. The moment Director Campbell delivered his final verdict, the neighborhood seemed to shift. Like the air itself recognized that the HOA's grip on everyone's sanity had finally cracked. And as the sun shone fiercely overhead, illuminating every blade of grass and every carved groove in the fountain, Mark stood trembling in the middle of my yard with the look of a man watching his entire empire collapse in real time. His clipboard lying useless on the ground at his feet, while his volunteers slowly backed away from him, as if he were a malfunctioning sprinkler they didn't want to get sprayed by. And it was at that exact moment that Harold, the vice president of the HOA board, walked briskly down the street with two other board members trailing behind him. They stopped a few feet away, out of breath, clearly having driven over the moment Campbell called them, their expressions a mix of disappointment, frustration, and resignation, as if they had expected this day to come but hoped it wouldn't be today. And when Mark saw them, he instantly straightened, wiping imaginary dust from his shirt, desperately trying to restore whatever tiny shred of authority he thought he still possessed. Harold, thank God you're here, he shouted, gesturing wildly at the fountain. These county officials are attacking us. They're trying to strip the HOA of its power. You must support me. Harold didn't even blink. Mark, he said, voice flat, we need to talk. Yes, Mark cried, talk some sense into them. No, Harold replied, talk to you. Mark blinked rapidly. To me? Daniels and Campbell stepped aside, letting the HOA board move closer. Mike and Greg hovered nearby, sipping coffee like they were watching a season finale. Harold unfolded a paper, one with the HOA letterhead at the top, but unlike Mark's scribbled rule sheets, this one actually looked official, printed, reviewed, and signed. Mark, Harold began carefully, we received the county's preliminary violation report. Lies, Mark shouted. The county is misguided, I am being targeted. No, Harold said, shaking his head. You're being held accountable. Mark froze like someone had unplugged him. Accountable? Yes, Harold continued. This isn't the first complaint, Mark. You've rewritten rules without board approval, fined homeowners for non-existent violations, changed landscaping codes weekly, tried to ban colors we've already approved, and I improved this community, Mark screamed. I saved property values. You damaged them, Harold said. Constant rule changes scare buyers, your aggressive enforcement scares residents, and now he gestured to the fountain. This is an illegal rock, Mark insisted. An eyesore, a public safety nightmare. It's a historical landmark, Harold reminded him, and you tried to remove it illegally. Mark stomped his foot like a furious toddler. It does not matter, the HOA has full authority, Campbell spoke up. Your HOA has decorative authority, Daniels added, not seizure authority, not regulatory authority, Campbell continued, not historical jurisdiction, not municipal clearance, not enforcement capability, Daniels nodded. Not demolition approval, Campbell finished, and certainly not the power to rewrite law. Mark's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on a dock. Harold unfolded the paper fully. Mark, the board held an emergency meeting this morning after we learned about your operation. We voted unanimously. V voted, Mark whispered. About what? Harold took a breath. About your position. My MY position? Mark squeaked. You cannot vote about MY position without ME present. We can, Harold said, and we did. Lewis, another board member, stepped forward. Mark, you're removed. The words hit harder than any fine he'd ever issued. Are removed? Mark croaked. Why, you can't remove me, I am the HOA. You were, Harold said gently, not anymore. No, Mark screamed. No, I won't accept this. I built this HOA. I made this community what it is. You made it miserable, Greg said loudly. Mike clapped in agreement. You created fear, Harold said. And fear isn't leadership. Mark's eyes darted desperately from face to face, but every board member avoided his gaze. Even his loyal volunteers stood several feet away, pretending to check their clipboards to avoid being pulled into his meltdown. I can't fix this, Mark pleaded. I will write new rules, better rules. I will ban historical objects. Campbell raised an eyebrow. That's not helping your case. I am still president, Mark yelled. Lewis stepped forward with another paper. Mark, your keycard to the HOA building has been deactivated. Your login credentials suspended. Your authority revoked. Mark staggered backward. Suspended, effective immediately, Lewis said. Pending the county's full investigation, you are prohibited from issuing fines, notices, or entering homeowners' properties for inspections. But that's my job, Mark cried. That's THATS everything I do. Exactly, Harold said. And that's the problem. The neighbors began gathering in quiet clusters, watching the downfall with the reverence of spectators observing a historical moment themselves. Mark looked around, shaking, sweating, desperate. Then his eyes landed on me, the rage reignited. This is your fault, he screamed. You ruined me, you destroyed everything I built, I shrugged. You did that yourself, Mark. No, he bellowed. You should have just removed the rock. The fountain, I corrected. The rock. Mark screamed again, voice cracking like glass. Daniels stepped forward. Mr. Rudd, if you interfere with this fountain again, we will pursue legal action. Campbell added, and the state will review whether you're eligible to hold any enforcement position in the future. Mark whimpered like a deflated balloon. And no, please, Harold placed a hand on his shoulder, not comforting but final. Go home, Mark. Mark shook his head violently. No, the HOA needs me. The HOA will survive, Harold said. It might even improve. Slowly, painfully, Mark bent to pick up his clipboard, the symbol of the power he no longer had, and as he hugged it to his chest, he turned and walked away, not marching, not stomping, but shuffling, defeated, each step smaller than the last. When he reached the sidewalk, he paused, looked back at the fountain one last time with a mixture of hatred and heartbreak, and then he disappeared down the street. Silence filled the yard. Harold exhaled heavily. We're rewriting every rule he ever wrote. Good, Mike said. Start with the one about mailbox shadows. Greg laughed. Campbell turned to me. Your fountain is safe. We'll send certified documentation to your records. Daniels nodded. And we'll add extra protections to prevent this from happening again. I ran my hand along the cool stone rim of the fountain, the sun warming my back, and smiled. Thank you. Campbell shook my hand. You did the right thing. As the county officials packed up and the neighbors drifted back to their homes, the fountain stood quietly, unchanged, untouched, and finally protected. Not just by history, but by a whole community that had grown tired of one man's crusade. And as the sunlight glistened across the carved limestone bowl, it felt poetic that the very piece Mark tried to erase was the same one that erased him.